and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer in Tel Aviv. Violent attacks over and over again have become part of the fabric of life in Palestinian communities in the West Bank that are adjacent to outposts set up by extremist settlers determined to terrorize and intimidate the Palestinian residents off of the land they live on. Former Deputy Attorney General Yehudit Karp wrote in Haaretz this week about the phenomenon she says most Israelis prefer not to look at and much of the Israeli media simply ignores. Quote, "A horrifying reality of Jewish terrorism under government auspices prevails in the occupied territories. Pogroms, expropriations, thefts of land, grazing areas and herds of sheep and goats, homes set on fire with their occupants inside, the expulsion of pastoral communities, uprooting of olive trees and systematic harm to the dignity, livelihoods, and sense of personal safety of Palestinians, all while the law goes unenforced deliberately." It feels terrible to call such acts routine, but that is what they have become, as Israel and the wider world has had its attention focused much more on dramatic events playing out on a mass scale in Gaza over the past 2.5 years, ever since October 7th. Most recently, of course, eyes and nerves have been focused further afield at Iran, where U.S. warships this week gather for a possible attack, and President Donald Trump weighs his decision as to whether to launch that attack at the regime whose retaliation will have huge consequences for Israel. But Israelis taking their eyes off of what is happening every day at the West Bank do so at their own peril. As Karp wrote, disregard for human rights beyond the checkpoints and across the Green Line paves the way for the disregard of the rights of the state citizens. That's why it's so important to have journalists like Haaretz's Matan Golan reporting daily on what is happening on the West Bank. My conversation with her on the embattled Bedouin community of Mukhmas and the wider use of settler violence to expel West Bank Palestinians from their communities is coming up.
I'm Esther Solomon, Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz English. Around the world, the fight is on to preserve critical and independent media. Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, upholds its long tradition of accurate, committed, and incisive journalism, refusing to bend its reporting to pressure from any government or leader. A digital subscription to Haaretz gives you up-to-the-minute news and analysis in English from journalists who live Israel's reality and are committed to covering the Middle East and its global repercussions. At the same time, your subscription supports the cause of a free press that holds the powerful to account in Israel and around the world. I invite you to become a subscriber to Haaretz now. Just go to Haaretz.com and use the code Haaretz10, that's Haaretz with the number 10, for 10% off an annual subscription.
Matan Golan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Matan, let's start with focusing on what has been happening over time in one Bedouin community in the center of the West Bank, the community of Mukhmas, which has been the target of settler violence, far from the only target, but one that you know well and have been looking at really closely. Matan, your beat for Haaretz, the West Bank, seems to me to be a really complicated one because on one hand, you're covering these daily incidents in which you have to report in very careful detail on what happened. On the other, you have to kind of bring readers' attentions to the wider patterns and the forces at work. So let's first look at what's played out in Mukhmas, and then we'll widen out to what it means overall. First of all, where is it? How did the location come on your radar? And what's happened there in the past few months?
So Mukhmas is found at eastern or northeastern to Ramallah. There is a village which is called Mukhmas, which is actually Area B. And next to it, there is a Bedouin community which is found on its outskirts or in Area C. This community had been through arrestments for a long time, and even prior to the first brutal attacks in October, many families have took their children and the women away from the place. So it's a place that is slowly losing its ground, while the men are trying to keep their presence on ground.
The women and children have been moved out because it's too dangerous?
Yeah. So in 21st of October, a new outpost was established on the hill just above the Bedouin community, actually between the village of Mukhmas to the Bedouin community. And from a very early stage, they understood that this thing is different. This is too close, this is too dangerous, and something bad is about to happen. In the days following the war, it was October, right? So olive harvest season, there was uprooting of olive trees in the valley between the outpost and village. And on the 25th of October, if I'm not mistaken, it was Saturday, there was the first brutal attack in which there was live shooting, setting houses on fire, and brutal violence against both Palestinians and both Israeli protective presence activists, which are accompanying this community for a very long time.
So the outpost is called Kol Mevaser. How big is it? Is it one building? Is it a bunch of buildings? What kind of people are there? Do you know much about it?
We're talking about young settlers, teenagers mostly. When it was established and when the first attack took place, it was only a piece of fabric hanged on poles on top of the hill. It's been evacuated 9 times, so each and every time it's becoming stronger and bigger. After the brutal attack on the 25th of October, this outpost got into the short list of a few outposts, 6 or 7 in number, that the Israeli security forces are identifying as a violent place. And therefore, they have the right to depopulate the place and destruct the buildings. Since 2023, destruction of Israeli Jewish settlements or outposts needs the approval of Minister Bezalel Smotrich, unless the place is identified as a violent place, as an extra violent place that distracts the security in the area. And since then, at least 9 times the outpost was depopulated or distracted. In one of the time they got to the hill, half an hour after the demolition. Basically, there's a distraction of the facility, but the people just escaped to the hill below. And although it's a closed military area, they're still there. They're on the hill.
The security forces go to clear them out on a regular basis just because they're trying to get rid of them, or do they do so in reaction to them harassing or violently attacking or doing something to the Palestinians?
It happens more frequently after attacks. After each and every attack, security forces are going up to the hill. Yet, it's not always burning the houses. It happened 3 times, but you have also smaller events of pepper spraying people within the houses, or throwing stones at cars that are driving next to the Bedouin community. You get many of those.
So the security forces have no way of preventing these attacks and no way of preventing the occupants of the outpost from returning every time, of these 9 times when they got rid of them, there's nothing that they can do to get them to stop coming back?
It depends who you ask. Basically, the Israeli system, and it was also said in the High Court of Justice last week, that the IDF doesn't have enough manpower to be present on ground 24/7 in the communities or the villages which are being constantly attacked in order to provide security for them. And then you also have the police, and you have a question of whether you got or you didn't get information that an attack is about to happen. Apparently, there is a very hard time to actually convict those people. I think that the case of Mukhmas is a very strong one because it's one of the only 6 that are actually identified as extremely violent and dangerous. And the fact that the Israeli system, the country, the security forces are unable to stop those attacks says a lot.
And there have been no arrests made?
As far as I know, and it's also information which is quite hard to get, but as far as I know, it might not be accurate. There were 2 people that were arrested during or following the brutal attacks in Mukhmas. As far as I know, both of them were released from lack of evidence.
So speaking of gathering evidence, last month you and another Haaretz reporter, Yarden Michaeli, got together and you published an investigation based on access to what you could find on video, satellite images, eyewitness accounts, showing how one of the attacks took place. When you looked at the images, when you looked at that evidence, did you see things that maybe people had talked about but you hadn't really observed? What do these things look like exactly?
I think that this documentation, the footage of the attack, it was rare because it enabled people to understand hearing is a very major part in it as well. How it actually looks like, how organized it is. The group is coming, you see tens of figures that are going in the dark, lightning building after building. You hear the cry of the dogs. I saw these dogs the day after when I arrived to the field, and you can really sense it. Many of the brutal attacks are actually taking place only a few minutes. It's between 3 to 8 minutes on average. The destruction is made over that time, and afterwards they just escape. So you hear this thing in many testimonies, but this footage made those testimonies visible and reachable.
You wrote that a man and a woman were prevented from escaping a fire in their homes, and then when they managed to get out, they were beaten up by the attackers?
True. I saw the photos of the man that was attacked, and I have spoke with his cousin that was not in his house on that day, and his house was burned as well to the ground. So it was the uncle and the wife of the uncle. They were asleep at that time on mattresses on the floor. According to the testimony, the settlers broke with a stone the windows and threw a Molotov cocktail into the building. And while the building is starting to get in flames, and the two are being awakened from their house being burned down by violent settlers, they've tried to open the door. Now, we'll never know for how long they were actually prevented from opening the door, but just imagine waking up in this fire, trying to open the door, being prevented. And while they got out, they were hardly beaten by the settlers outside the house. And you can see the marks on the body of that person. People were afraid for his eye until he got released from the hospital. The eye survived.
Wow, so these structures burn down. Do people try to rebuild them? Are they allowed to rebuild? Are there interference with their attempts to rebuild?
The Bedouin communities are unapproved settlements, right? So this is basically an illegal construction. So the Bedouin community in Mukhmas have tried to rebuild the houses, and a week after the houses were set on fire, the construction of the new buildings was once again set on fire. And then they tried to rebuild it once again. In one of those days, there were actually soldiers that arrived to the place. There are two closed military zones, one on the hill and the other on the Bedouin community. The basic logic in the closed military zone on the Bedouin community is to protect the people. In this case, it doesn't happen too frequently, I must say, but in this case, the Israeli activists of the protective presence were demanded to get out of the Bedouin community. The soldiers also ordered the Bedouins to stop building their houses, which were burned by the settlers.
The activists are kept out. Are the settlers also kept out?
The settlers, when they see security forces, they basically go down to the valley and take a cover, waiting for the few minutes or half an hour that the forces are around, and then they're going back up to the hill. The IDF eventually got up to the hill, but by the way they got to the hill, it all happens, it's the same thing. The settlers are hiding, going back once again, and and after violent attacks, the place will be distracted once again, and once again will be rebuilt.
None of this is happening in secret and shame, right? It's all being celebrated on social media. It's all very public, and the settlers are proud of what they're doing.
Yeah, so there are a few extreme right-wing social media and WhatsApp groups that are propagating their success in those attacks. One of them, which is called Anash, it is so blunt that is hard to understand how come this page is actually still running. It's pure incitement for violence.
You quoted a song from a video with the lyrics, "We go down to the villages, we burn and slaughter and start a war. An alarm goes off and everybody gathers. A party is starting." They described it as a party.
I have no words to describe it. It's grotesque. And once again, the fact that it keeps on going for months, and some groups are actually doing it for years, probably says a lot.
So presumably the ultimate goal is to depopulate the Bedouin Mukhmas, at least, and drive them away permanently, or they have their sights on all of Mukhmas?
If we look only at Mukhmas, so at the early phases, of course, cleaning or ethnically cleansing Area C, in which the Bedouin community is found, though there were already attacks in the village in Area B, cars were set on fire. Actually, the majority of the brutal attacks or the hard attacks are happening in Area B.
Area B, for those who don't know, is where Israel is responsible for the security and the Palestinian Authority is responsible for day-to-day operation, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to Area C, where Israel is responsible for everything.
True. Certain settlers organizations are saying it out loud. It's a geopolitical battle, but it is rooted in religion reasoning. They're basically saying that they're just following God's words, God's orders. And among those orders, there is no light as long as there is a foreign presence on ground. So no, we're not talking only about Area C. We're talking about the whole of Israel. So it's a process. It's a process, and the early parts are currently in Area C, which is almost completely ethnically cleansed. In the last 3 years, tens of communities have fled.
Last week, you reported on a case where the Palestinians turned to the Israeli High Court of Justice to step in, ordering the army to help the residents of a village that had been completely depopulated, Ras Ein al-Auja. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, to return to their homes. They were expelled by the settler violence we've been talking about, and the court ordered the military to protect them. This is the case where you said that the military argued that they don't have enough manpower to do so. So, I mean, do you think these court orders are going to do any good? They'll be enforced? They'll be able to return there? Or do you feel like it's too little too late and it's not going to happen?
So the ruling of the High Court of Justice about the case of Ras Ein al-Auja, which is a community, a Bedouin community, it was a very positive one, basically. The only problem is that it's not the first time that the High Court of Justice is actually deciding and demanding the Israeli security forces to allow the safe return of communities that had fled from violent reasons, from settlers' violence, from their houses. And we've seen already in the case of Zanuta and in the case of Muarajat that those rulings haven't really changed anything on the ground. The residents have tried to go back in a coordinated way with the army. In Muarajat, on the night of their return, buildings were set on fire and they had to flee once again. And they're not even trying or thinking about retrying that in the near future. In the case of Ras Ein al-Auja, we'll have to wait and see. It's a different community. It was the biggest one in the West Bank, definitely in the Jordan Valley. The fact that they managed to stay on ground for such a long time is actually the anomaly these days in the West Bank and not the opposite way around. All of the majority of their neighbors.
Does the assistance and protective presence of these activists help?
Well, in the case of Ras Ein al-Auja, it proves itself. There was for more than a year, I think that's nearly 2 years, there was protective presence 24/7. in the community. And this had created the anomaly because they were able to delay the natural process which is happening those days in the West Bank. Same for Mukhmas.
And these organizations like Rabbis for Human Rights, other civil society organizations supporting the Palestinian communities, Israelis, Jewish Israelis coming in and accompanying them, and international volunteers?
Mm-hmm.
The Bedouin village of Mukhmas is an Area C which is under Israeli military and civilian control, and you say that there's been almost complete depopulation in Area C. But this week came news that Israel's security cabinet decided to expand Israeli authority and enforcement measures in areas A and B, the parts that are supposed to be at least partially under the control of the Palestinian Authority. And that announcement was made by both finance minister and minister in the defense ministry, Bezalel Smotrich, and by defense minister Israel Katz. Smotrich said, announcing the change in the laws, that, quote, "We will continue to kill the idea of a Palestinian state." Can you explain for us what authority they want to expand? I mean, basically, isn't this a complete rollback of the Oslo Accords, which created the Palestinian Authority and gave them these powers? Can you talk about what, under Smotrich, he plans to change?
That's a big one. Let's try to divide it into different aspects. Let's first start with the declaration. The enforcement rights that are currently being discussed are for archaeological sites and for water violations and against environmental hazards. When we are discussing the violation of the Oslo Accords by the new enforcement authority that Israel took to itself, we are actually missing the point in my eyes, because this is not the first time. This act doesn't happen in a vacuum. Currently, there are 10 outposts that are on ground in area A and B. Most of them, the majority of them, are in area B, and apparently there is one in area A. Some of the outposts in area B are on ground since 2024. No outpost is supposed to be on ground in area B, yet those specific outposts are not being demolished very frequently, if at all, and that's also a violation of the Oslo Accords, which is happening daily. The fact that the IDF is found in the refugee camps in Tulkarem and in Jenin area for over a year, and at the moment it doesn't seem like we're going to take a step back. This is also a violation of the Oslo Accords, as the IDF is basically not supposed to be present in area A. Lately, the disengagement was cancelled by the Israeli government, and currently it's not only that we are not withdrawing from the refugee camps, we are actually expanding the presence of the IDF in northern Samaria, in areas that Israel is currently preparing to get back to. The vector is towards complete destruction of the Oslo Accords, but perhaps you can say that it's in a salami system. It's a piece after piece, and this time it's quite a big chunk, but it's certainly not the first one and not the last one.
So, Matan, what's the connection between some of these measures which sound very obscure, right? We're talking about water and archaeology, and this sweeping declaration that we will kill the idea of a Palestinian state. Do you see it as direct a connection as Smotrich does?
I mean, this is what's happening on ground. In the Palestinian street, when you go around the villages, you see that many shops are closed. The economic crisis is something which is not being discussed too often, but it's definitely present on ground. In universities, some courses are actually being closed because there are not enough students that register. And even for the courses that actually happen, some of the courses are online because there are so many checkpoints and roadblocks that people are basically unable to move around freely.
So it seems like an absurdity where on one hand, in Gaza, we have the Netanyahu government going along with Trump, supposedly creating this board of peace, which underneath it is going to have Palestinian technocratic self-rule, drawing a great deal from Palestinian authority figures. And at the same time, we're taking away the limited amount of self-rule that they have in the West Bank Do you see any connection between what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank? Does this look like a conscious effort to weaken the Palestinian Authority even weaker than it already is?
Definitely. And it's not a secret. Minister Bezalel Smotrich is saying it out loud. And in fact, also Netanyahu in last September in Ma'ale Adumim had stated that there will be no Palestinian state. So this is not something that is a secret.
So if you can't have a political decision for various considerations of let's pass the law annexing the West Bank, you're going to do it, as you said, like a salami, piece by piece, settler intimidation, evacuating more and more communities, and these laws making it easier to weaken the Palestinian Authority that's there and replace it with the Israeli authorities.
Exactly. And in fact, there are two contradictory vectors in their mind. On one hand, of course, they want to annex, and they want to annex yesterday or today, right, as soon as possible. On the other hand, the fact that the Israeli law is not in power in the West Bank is definitely one of the tools that are allowing the land grab, which is growing and extensively in the last 3 years, which will finally allow the annexation while the facts are already placed on ground.
Matan Golan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Looks like you've got your work cut out for you. Good luck and stay safe.
Thank you very much.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guest, Matan Golan, and to producer and editor, Adi Shacham. If you'd like to continue to listen to the podcast and make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please leave us a 5-star rating and a comment, and that way more people can find us. And to keep up with all the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.